Welcome to Two Peas on a Pod Office Hours, our bi-monthly companion show where we continue to explore connection, friendship, and the relationships that shape who we are and who we're becoming. I'm your host, Dr. Miriam Kermeyer. I'm a clinical psychologist, friendship expert, and global speaker on human connection and social support. Two Peas on a Pod Office Hours is our one-on-one time together. It's a thoughtful, judgment-free space to unpack what's really going on in our friendships. Yes, of course, the things we talk about with our closest friends, and also the conversations and friendship topics we sometimes avoid saying out loud. In today's episode, I am sitting down with Neha Ruch, founder of the Power Pause, to explore how the pauses in our lives, be it career pauses, caregiving pauses, identity pauses, how these don't just reshape our work and sense of self, they also can quietly reshape our friendships and how we show up for each other. Neha Ruch is the founder of the Power Pause, a platform and movement reshaping the conversation around career pauses, motherhood, ambition, and identity. After earning her MBA from Stanford University and spending a decade in brand strategy, Neha stepped away from her career when she became a mother and went on to build a community for women navigating the often overlooked space between work and family life. She is now a sought-after speaker and the author of the USA Today's best-selling book, The Power Pause. It is absolutely no surprise that Neha is shifting conversations globally and in your group chats, probably. Here is what I really want you to know ahead of our conversation today. No matter what stage or phase of life you are in, you can and will relate to the idea of a pause. Whether it's for parental leave, caregiving reasons, whether you're taking a sick leave or sabbatical, if you're shifting out of your 9-to-5 and into entrepreneurship, or you are pausing productivity in the name of personal growth and exploration. In all of those moments, friendship becomes especially important, not just as something that you have to maintain, but something that you can actively tend to and benefit from. So as always, settle in, get comfortable, maybe even take a little pause yourself because we are diving into even more stories, science, and secrets of friendship. I am Dr. Miriam, and this is Two Peas on a Pod Office Hours. Two Peas on a Pod meets the Power Pause. This is such a monumental day, even if just for the alliteration of it all. You and I have so much to talk about, and so I'd love to get started by hearing in your own words a little bit about how the Power Pause came to be in your life.
First of all, I love the title of this podcast.
Thank you.
It's so fun. And second, thank you for having me. And then third, I came to this work when I stepped into my own Power Pause, but it wasn't called that at the time. It was 2016. So, flashback 10 years. On New Year's Day, I had my first son, Bodhi. We were just talking about entering those tween years. And I, yes, was up in the middle of the night, not sleeping, covered in milk, very messy. And yet, I think I finally felt a sense of peace and belonging that I'd been looking for a long time, which obviously gets to the root of so much of your work, right? I'd been trying so hard to fit for so long and then climb in the context of work that suddenly I had this little boy who just wanted me to be me. And I actually just wanted to rest into that feeling. And so I decided to downshift my career. I decided to go part-time. And I'm obviously fast forwarding through the math of that and the negotiating with my client to go part-time, but it all worked to give me some space to lean into motherhood. And as soon as I said that I wanted more time at home, I started hearing really from well-intended people, well, are you giving up? Are you going to be bored all day? Or you're not going to feel fulfilled? Are you wasting that spot at business school? And it was, it was in such harsh contrast to how I was actually feeling, which was for the first time really grounded and centered and playful. And there was just this opening up I was feeling. And I was walking around meeting these other women in playgrounds and play spaces. And all of them were sort of contending with these similar choices and actually making really interesting shifts of their own to make room for motherhood. And none of it matched the outdated caricature we were getting handed, which was this sort of stagnant, shut in, bored housewife. And so I started the Power Pause as a very small blog and Instagram alongside raising my kids. I eventually paused. So it was really during naps and night times that I wanted to sort of assemble a new character, or rather dismantle the character and replace it with a much more dynamic, fluid narrative of these incredible modern women who were really trying to lean into this chapter and shape their next.
Yeah. Well, I'm certainly so glad that you're here today for this conversation, but also that I happened to come across your work many years ago at a time when I needed it personally as well. And you have done so much important work in shifting the narrative and shifting the conversation and encouraging us all to bring a little bit more nuance and thoughtfulness to the discourse about what it means to take a pause, about what it means to enter into this phase of parenthood and all of the interesting questions and identity shifts that come with that. I'm wondering for you, in that moment where you were holding your son and realized that you wanted more of that feeling, as you said, whether it was the presence, the pause, the playfulness of that, did that come as a surprise to you, given your background and given your own work history? So did you have to do a little bit of that dismantling on your own to get to the place of both seeing that in yourself and recognizing that that was a pause you were motivated to take?
I think I felt clarity with him, but discomfort when I was with other people, right? So in the wee hours of the night when it was just the two of us, I felt really confident that, wow, all of those years of hustle have given me a foundation of great experience. And I really do trust that if I sit with this for a little bit, if I enjoy this time, I will find my next possibilities. I really did feel very clear in that. As soon as I stepped outside of that room, I think the dismantling had to begin because, you know, in my early 30s at that point, I'd spent the better part of a decade really working towards one version of ambition, success, value. A lot of people knew my friends, my family, my husband knew me as a certain version of myself. So when they were contending with who are you now if you aren't you going to be bored, I had to, for the first time in my life, separate my self-belief from what other people thought of me and what they said. And so that was really the dismantling. And then so much of the work of the book is rewriting narratives because then I had to sort of move through every inflection point. Am I ambitious enough? Am I still feminist? Am I financially of value? I had to do that sort of year over year. But the first piece was making a decision that I knew was right while holding other people's misunderstanding and
Yes.
disapproval.
I want to actually pause here for a second because I think everyone listening, regardless of what life stage or phase they're in or whatever life experiences they have had or will have, can relate to this experience of, on the one hand, not necessarily perhaps feeling seen in terms of the advice that you're getting from other people or other people's concerns that come from a place, of course, of care and of wanting you to be, your best self, your truest self. What advice do you have for people who are listening who are facing that disconnect almost in terms of how I'm seeing and experiencing myself and the version of me that other people are perceiving? I think that's such a powerful experience that you've had where you've been able to tap into that authentic self while also hearing and recognizing people's feedback. But as you said, holding that as something external to you and not allowing that to necessarily penetrate and integrate and influence your own self-concept. How did you do that?
First of all, let me say I held both,
Mm-hmm.
and one just outweighed the other. I really wanted to know this new version of me. I really wanted to know this baby. I really wanted to know myself as a mother. I really wanted to see what those days at home would feel like. And, when we did research, and, I commissioned a survey in 2023 called the American Mothers on Pause Survey, and women who choose to downshift or pause have a myriad of reasons. It's never just one, right? And the first one is the very valid want to spend time with their kids, less stress in the home, financial considerations, right? And so all three were in combination. And so that sort of math was in front of me. And so could I make that decision despite also holding, wow, it feels really uncomfortable, feeling misunderstood and misjudged, and it makes me want to cry at night sometimes, and it makes me feel badly, and I want to over explain myself, having to sort of lay all of those out and still say, but I still choose this, right? Like
Yeah.
a lot of it is that,
Yeah.
people always say, like, know your why. I spent a lot of time figuring out my why in those sort of wee hours, and it felt really clear. And I think for a lot of people walking through whatever choice point they're making, it's important to name and not disregard the perception of me counts, and it makes me feel bad. And that is a factor. That is a real factor, as are all of these other things, and then weigh them out. Right.
Yeah.
And so I would just add, though, that sort of in that process, which really took a year or 2 years of discomfort, really, I read a book called The Four Agreements, which you might know, by Don Miguel Ruiz. And there is a chapter, it's basically agreements you're making with yourself. And there's a chapter about criticism. And you agree with yourself that when someone criticizes, and it doesn't have to be overt criticism, but it can be a judgment, it can be a disapproval. It has very little to do with you and a lot to do with how they are experiencing those choices, right? And that, in retrospect, like, my mother-in-law had choice words about my decision to pause, really feeling like I was giving up, and not from a bad place, but from a place of reconciling her own choices, right? And so I would say it's first laying it all out, evaluating it for yourself with clarity, and then also recognizing where those other judgments come from.
I think ultimately what we're talking about is also empathy, right? Recognizing other people's experiences and how those may be guiding their fears or perceptions of you, and recognizing that that's not yours to hold. And also, you use this language before that just made me feel like part of what we're talking about is befriending this new version of yourself. I love how you put that up. There was this part of me, this version of me, this new version of me that was emerging that I wanted to get to know. And I think that's such a beautiful way of thinking about stepping into transition periods, stepping into a pause, and kind of welcoming that. And the other thing that I'm hearing that reminds me a little bit of an idea that we use often in therapy, it's so easy to feel like we need to avoid the ambivalence that's there, or avoid the conflicting beliefs or thoughts or all of the noise. And sometimes what happens is, if we say to ourselves, don't think about that, don't listen to it, that only makes it bigger. It just then creates this tension and this conflict where it just feels ever present, and it grows. And so it's almost like this visual, you talked about walking along. I'm thinking of driving along. And it's almost this idea of, you don't need to say to the criticism or to the naysayers or to this version of yourself that is perhaps fearful as well. Oh, don't even get in the car. You're not along for the ride. I'm going to drive right past you. You can say, you're in the passenger seat, or you're in the back seat. I'm driving. I'm determining where we're going. I'm leading the way, and you can also be along for the ride. So it's kind of like befriending your new self, and also treating this other part of you and the fears that are there as a friend, but one that you don't necessarily, or a companion, one that you don't necessarily have to listen to and let steer the ship, or the car in this case. So I think that's such helpful advice. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm wondering, in terms of this idea of the pause, I mean, so much of your work centers on
redefining motherhood and ambition. But you kind of alluded to this before. There are all sorts of reasons why people may choose to pause their careers and embrace that experience of motherhood in a different way. There are also all sorts of other pauses that people take in their lives, both out of necessity and out of choice. And in doing this work over the last few years, are there other pauses that you have heard about? I would imagine that people open up to you and share their stories about the different moments in life when they have taken a pause and how that also relates so much to the work that you're doing.
The research shows that 1 in 3 women feel forced to pause, which I think I want to underscore only because this work still applies if it comes out of need or necessity. It is about then taking back the narrative to be able to then walk through what's in front of you with a sense of possibility and a sense of confidence and a sense of empowerment. So I recognize that women come to this choice, men and women, by the way, come to this choice to shift their time and energy away from paid work for a multitude of reasons. Sometimes it's because of financial considerations, as we know, especially in the United States, the cost of childcare and affordable childcare and quality childcare has made working out of the home a challenge for two-parent households. And so that's a reality. I've seen women and men, by the way, talk about shifting their energy away from work because of mental health issues and burnout and wanting to reset and reignite what comes next. I've seen women shift, especially for elder care in more recent circles. I think you're watching this millennial generation age into the sandwich generation of caring for their elders. I've seen relocations, right? So if one partner's job demands that shift, there is a lot of intellectual labor that goes into moving an entire family, getting a family settled. And I think the sort of undercurrent of all of this is that real life has a lot of real priorities beyond the workplace. And we were handed a very binary view on you either work or you don't work. And unfortunately, what that does is shut people into feeling like, oh gosh, if I take my foot off the gas, then I'm just out. It's a career ender. As opposed to the reality of this very fluid life wherein there are going to be other priorities, right? Healthcare, childcare. I want to also call out because you mentioned women shifting after their first child. It's actually not often after their first child. It's usually after multiple. So when you have a second or a third child, and it changes the equation around daycare and
Mm-hmm.
the logistics in the home, you see a big uptick around second or third grade when a child enters second or third grade, because that's a diagnosis for ADHD and neurodivergence. So as you know, there's a lot of time and energy spent to manage and advocate for the child. We see a big uptick around teen mental health and then college application year. And so it isn't even, I was at one tour stop and one woman said, this is my third pops. My daughter's in
Yeah.
college. I just want to enjoy. It wasn't even about shepherding her through the college process. It was about being there. And so there's no one reason, but life does have a lot of reasons to shift our time.
Yeah, I really appreciate you calling this out directly and bringing in again this nuance, because it's so true that there is this binary way of thinking about work and ambition and work that goes on inside the home, and so many of those narratives are outdated. And this is where we start to get into the overlap between the work that you do and the work that I do on connection, because we certainly see that in the world of friendship as well, where there are all sorts of binary perspectives about what it looks like to have a strong, healthy social network, what female friendships in particular look like. And so just some of the things that are coming up for me right now. I mean, there's this idea of, I need to have a best friend and that's the right way to demonstrate to myself and to others that I have successful close friendships. And if I don't, then I failed. Or if we look again at women's friendships specifically, there's this idea that either they are incredibly close and that there's this almost sisterhood quality to that connection. And if not, then you fall into the competitive, catty, mean girl phenomenon. And we know that, of course, these are experiences that people have, and yet there is such a spectrum and there is so much difference when it comes to people's friendship experiences and trajectories. And there's so many differences between our individual friendships. And part of what you're helping me to realize right now is, yes, of course, there are so many differences in terms of the reasons why people may choose or feel forced to or decide to take a pause. And there are also differences potentially between the various pauses that we take in our lives. And bringing in that nuance, I would imagine, has a lot of value there, not only in terms of being a little bit more validating of our own experiences and giving ourselves permission to take those pauses, but also potentially starts to influence how we speak to each other and how we support each other in those moments. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, because I think this is where we again start to get into the intersection of your work and mine. How do you think about the role that connection plays in the whole experience of a power pause? How do you think our friendships intersect with that period in life, with that shift?
I will start by saying that one of the big myths that we were handed was that our network would dry up if we stepped into a career pause, right? That we would be shut in, that we're stagnant, that we become a nobody in the context of our circles. And it really gets at the heart of so much of the identity piece of my work, right? Which is first and foremost this idea that if you don't have a professional title, you sort of lose value in conversations. And I think that, what I think sparked for you in our conversation about different priorities is that it is a really healing quality to realize that everyone has other priorities. It's not just us in a vacuum. And modern life demands us all to make shifts. And how might we hold the idea of ambition and success and priorities more loosely to see each other as not having to prove our ambition, but with a certain trust that we're all doing our best to align our time with our values, right? And really, we're choosing an intentional life, and that's what we're connecting around, right? So we want to, I would say, I think one of the hardest parts is this feeling that you have to like prove your ambition or prove your motherhood. And so what a gift it could be if we can just be in spaces and hold each other in a way that we just accept that like everyone's making the best right choice for right now, and it's going to shift over and over again. And how might we get curious? I always say, instead of saying, what do you do? Could you just say a drop off? Like, what are you up to today?
Yeah.
Because then if you are on a downshift, you can say, I'm actually working on renovation. I'm taking care of my mom today. And you can talk about other priorities, and that sparks a connection that goes beyond the workplace. Or if you are in a full career sprint, right? Like I was last year, I might say like, I'm actually going on a tour and I'm feeling like really nervous about leaving the kids. And someone might say, oh, I'm like happy to keep an extra eye out. So you can see how this immediate putting the armor down between us, a colossal way in which not only to unite us, but also open up our circles. I think the part two, this idea, of networking has always felt confined to conferences or in the office. I can honestly say that my relationships expanded tenfold when I shifted for motherhood, because you are suddenly operating in new spaces, right? You're on playgrounds and baby movement classes, and suddenly, yes, you might have this invisible thread. Like I might say to you, I love your diaper bag, or what's your pediatrician's name? And it starts as this low hanging fruit of small talk, which you and I can get into the merits of small talk, but suddenly then you're able to have inroads to like, how's your relationship with your mother-in-law going? And like, what's your husband been, driving you crazy?
Some of the not so small topics of that whole experience. Yeah.
And just sharing in that same life, 1 hour, the research shows, right? 1 hour with someone in the same life stage as you. It doesn't have to last forever. Some of my earliest friendships in motherhood, sort of for the first 3 years, are no longer, but they served a great purpose because they normalized, they grounded, they inspired, they soundboarded.
You used the word myths before to kind of introduce this idea that our networks will necessarily collapse or evaporate when we take a pause. And you're sharing all of this helpful information and, frankly, permission slip to suggest that that's not the case. And in fact, it can be this very rich opportunity for building new connections. What are some of the other myths that you have come across and that you believe are important for all of us to reconsider?
I mean, I would lead with that first one, that if you give up your paid work, you're suddenly no one, right? Like, and I will tell you that we've been conditioned to believe that our title represents, that question, what do you do? That represents who you are.
Yeah.
And I would say you have this gift in those sort of transitions once you get past that very natural discomfort, by the way. I'm not going to gloss over it, feeling uncomfortable. If you've been running brand at a tech company and you've gotten used to saying that, suddenly that feels uncomfortable. And there is language, and I offer, right now I'm with my kids. We'll see what comes next. Right now I'm seeing my parents through elder care transition. We'll see what comes next. But I think the deeper work is realizing all of your talents, right? If you've been a practicing therapist, that goes with you. You're now just in this period where you're actually layering new experiences on. And really, if you lean into it, really understanding other parts of what makes you really good at you, right? Like the parts of your work, that being empathetic, being really curious about women and their interactions, that goes with you no matter what. And that will end up being your superpower, that belongs to you, not your company. I think the financial myth, the myth and the language really we've been handed down in this culture, in Western culture, is that if you are doing caregiving or work out of care or work not for pay, you're not contributing. And I had to, really work through that with my husband, in that we were always really good at going to the table on January 20th and spreading out looking at our finances like an organization where there's income in, income out against our budgets. But there was still a feeling, even though I felt financially dignified because we both had a seat at the table. I encourage everyone to, keep that conversation. I still felt like it was a luxury. And until my husband said, well, it's a luxury to be at home. And I said, wait a second. No, it's a luxury for you to get to go to the office without thinking about what's happening at home. And so maybe it's not a luxury. No part of our day is luxurious, but maybe our privilege is to get to choose. And we are actually an interdependent household where you partner working out of the home depends on me doing the unpaid work. And I would say that is the singular most important piece, because it sets you up to then be able to really step into what separates a power pause from just a pause, which is a power pause relies on the idea that when you're shifting for other priorities, you're actually reserving some space for yourself. And you get that permission to invest back into yourself as soon as you realize, I am contributing great value. I deserve to be whole and healthy. I deserve to be supported. So that's a big one. I'll pause there because there's a whole sort of section around really figuring out, well, how do I make this day to day mine? That is important.
There's so much in what you've just said that, has me spinning in the best of ways. The emphasis on choice and feeling like this is something I'm choosing and getting aligned in terms of the values and your reasons why, and having that be a source of empowerment, I think is so hugely important for everyone to hear. And also connects to friendship itself in terms of, I always say, part of what makes our friendships so valuable is that they are chosen, that we need to feel like we are choosing who our friends are, who we let into our lives, and who we let stay. And that is what makes our friendships so closely connected, and so closely connected to our sense of well-being and worth and identity, when we can feel like this is an ongoing choice that I'm making and a reflection of my values. So I love that part of it wholeheartedly. I'm also wondering, so in thinking about this whole experience and kind of the stepping into a power pause, I'm wondering what advice you have for women, for men, for everyone who's tuning in, knowing that they are either stepping into, about to step into, or might step into a power pause moment, in terms of how we can be proactive about that. Because I don't know about you, but one of the big things I see in my work is people being very reactive when it comes to their friendships or relationships or just life transitions of I'm going to wing it, or I'm going to step into this and I'm going to figure it out. And yes, having that, I can figure this out attitude is certainly a helpful one, but there are things that we can do ahead of time to prepare ourselves for a transition and to have that feel like a prepared, empowered choice. And what are some of the things that you have found to be helpful in your own life and in your work for being proactive about stepping into a pause?
I think that first piece, we talked a lot about the identity. I would feel and make peace with the discomfort that may come and know that that's normal. It's very normal to grieve the day to day that you've known and rely on this narrative that actually I'm not giving up my ambition. I'm redirecting it for a chapter of time. I can come back and recalibrate. The financial piece is huge. I recommend to everyone, if you can, 6 months ahead of time, you and your partner are laying out those finances together. I know money's an uncomfortable conversation. I'm not going to go ahead and say it's romantic, but it can be this like deeper conversation about what do we value? What do you value if I make this shift? Because as soon as you together decide that, then you're set up for a more empowering movement forward. But essentially, there are ways in which we've seen some couples for whom this is a big, big financial shift. I've seen a couple move from the Bay Area to Virginia Beach because they both said this is a value to us and we are going to make this lifestyle change to allow for it. There was another couple, it was a smaller shift. It was, we're going to cut family vacations for the next 3 years to make room for this. But they made those choices together. I think this gets to the heart of your work, this idea of networking on your way out. This is where I failed, but I interviewed hundreds of women who did a much better job than I did. A career pause is not a career ender. And not that I'm saying you need to start looking for your job as you're leaving, but you have this opportunity to pay homage to the fact that you've built this incredible network and reputation. How might you, even if you hate your job, even if you really don't like your job, how might you set yourself up for success such that they're a bridge back? The people who will remember you the most are the people you worked with the last, right? So take anyone you've touched, interacted with, the receptionist to the CEO, like any mentor, mentee, peer, out for coffee, send them a note saying that you're making this shift, because those are even if you don't return to the exact same role you were in, you never know how they might think of you in 3, 5 years, 10 years even.
Yes.
So I really encourage people to land that plane well. I did not do that. I did give 3 weeks notice. If you can give a month, I think it's important to essentially say, I loved this job. I loved what I got to do. And I'm so honored to have worked here. What can I do to set you up for success? Because your reputation matters.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely appreciate the proactive approach and this idea of when you are making a change or a transition or stepping into a power pause, of being intentional and proactive about expressing gratitude for, yes, the role, the experience, but also those connections, and laying a very strong foundation that you can then return to, whether that's during your pause, in informal ways, or at the tail end of a pause when you are considering shifting into a different space or role. I would imagine that both feels comforting and is a way to receive support in that moment for that transition, but also creates this solid foundation that you can build on. I want to actually talk about this for a second, because it's interesting. There's two sides to this. One, the first question that I have is, what advice do you have, if any, for people who are in the middle of a power pause when it comes to nurturing those connections, those professional connections, let's say, or personal connections that may be supportive in a professional context later on? How can we be thinking about how to continue nurturing those connections? And then the second question that I have is, one of the very well-intentioned themes that I often hear about is when a friend of ours from work goes on maternity leave or pat leave, or is stepping away from work for caregiving reasons or whatever it may be, there can be this felt sense of, I shouldn't reach out. I should respect their space, their desire to downshift, as you've said, or their felt need to step away from this role and this work and this circle or community even, and that reaching out would be inappropriate. It would be an overstep. And what do you think those people need to hear as well in terms of how we can stay connected to our friends, to our past colleagues even, who are in the middle of a power pause?
I'm so glad you asked this. I want to speak to the currently employed friends. This parent who or caregiver who may have paused, their brain didn't go die, right? Like their interest didn't wilt overnight. They had to make a strategic choice about their time, but they appreciate knowing that they are still seen as a professional, that they are still recognized for all their contributions, their interests, their connections that they had to you, right? And if you feel called to reach out to a friend, just like any other friend, you should reach out. It is on them to now respond. But unless it is like the first sort of few weeks of like newborn life that are sacred and can be, tricky to intrude upon as an employer, the inclusion of non-paid workers in your circles is so important to put opportunities on the table, to cultivate diverse work environments, right? Because those women or men may return to work in the next couple of years, and they will appreciate having that long-lasting relationship. For parents who are currently on a pause, I often talk a lot about that feeling of stuckness or lostness that people will feel when they're sort of in those early days. I'm not talking about the first sort of 30 days. I'm talking about like you're a few months in and you're like, what am I doing with my time?
Mm-hmm.
Often that happens because for the longest time, someone has handed you a schedule or a annual review of benchmarks you have to hit by the end of the year to get a promotion. And that disappears when you are not in the traditional workforce. Now, this applies, by the way, to people who pivot into entrepreneurship or freelance as well. And that can be really disorienting. But in that moment of lostness, I always encourage people to rely on the idea that goals dignify time. And they don't have to be grandiose goals, but the idea that you can now, for this year, put in place small professional, personal, family goals, right? And to bring this back to your question, under the professional bucket, it doesn't have to be, I'm going to build my next company, or I'm going to freelance for 20 hours. It can be, I'm going to go on LinkedIn for 20 minutes a week, and I'm going to engage with my old colleagues or my industry through content just to keep my finger on the pulse. Or I'm going to go out for coffee once a week or once a quarter with people I used to work with, people I'm interested in what they're doing, just to be able to move myself forward in some way. And we can get more into how you can achieve that sort of authentic goal setting. But I do think it's important that under that sort of professional goal, it doesn't have to be huge. It can be nurture those relationships and nurture them in small ways.
Mm-hmm. Part of what I really appreciate about your work as well is it really encourages us all to recognize that varied experiences are not at odds with each other. That even though these may be different phases of life, different periods of life with different paces, that taking a pause can be, in many ways, your next step.
Mm.
a step toward something else, even if that something else is the decision to continue taking a power pause,
Right.
that it is leading you forward as opposed to the idea that your life is inherently on pause.
Yes.
And stick with me here, because one of the things that I hear in the friendship world is this feeling of, I appreciate friendship, I value friendship, but that it is inherently at odds with everything else that I have going on in my life. That I am too busy with work to invest in friendships, that I have my partner and that relationship is hugely important to me and I want to nurture that as best I can. I am caring for little kids or aging parents. I am in a period of, self-growth and exploration. And it's not that I don't value my friendships or appreciate them. It's that on some level, they feel like they are at odds with everything else that I have going on. And so I just really appreciate this idea that you put out there, which is that we don't have to always see things as being at odds with each other. We can see them as being very integrated, in fact. And in the world of friendship, it's absolutely the case that, yes, of course, when you are spending time with a close friend, necessarily that is taking time away from someone or something else. But to your earlier point, there are different ways that we can measure the value or the impact of that experience. And we know that spending time with friends, when we feel connected and supported, whether that's with personal connections or supportive workplace connections, that actually strengthens our other relationships. That actually improves the quality of our marital relationship, our spouse, or our romantic connections. That strengthens our home life satisfaction. There's this crossover, and there's even spillover, which is what I often talk about, where when we feel connected and supported by our friends and our professional connections, our partners experience greater home life satisfaction. And so again, coming back to this idea of the nuance, and I just think your work is so important because it encourages us to rethink that calculation. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about friendships and even your friendships, if you are open to it. You had this great advice earlier, well, partly in terms of rethinking that myth that networking is necessarily on hold. And you gave some great advice for anyone to kind of re-examine how those small moments of connection can be helpful, not only for experiencing a greater sense of connection in that moment or less loneliness, but also setting a foundation for future friendships and maintaining a professional network. I want to talk a little bit about the role that our friends can play in supporting us during those power pauses. And I'm wondering, just speaking from personal experience even, what were some of the things that you found helpful in your conversations with friends as you were navigating your own power pause? And what have you heard from other women that you have interviewed in your work?
So will be honest, I had mixed experiences, but mind you, I stepped into a career pause 10 years ago. And that was a very different landscape pre-pandemic. And I say that because the backdrop for me in doing that was still the lean in movement and still the girl boss era. So there was a more harsh division between stay at home and working mother. And I think that was really the catalyst for my work is I just wanted to dismantle the divides because I can start with what didn't work, which was there were women, and I have lost two very close friends. One I repaired with, which is wonderful, and she's a lifelong friend. And I think she just needed time. She needed time to better understand my choices and better understand her experience with work and motherhood. And another one who really did voice that she felt like my decision was an affront to feminism. And I think in her, I could hold her experience with empathy to know that she was raised by an at-home mother who was left by her husband, my friend's father, and it caused a lot of strife and pain. And my friend had built her life to never experience that kind of pain. And so when I was navigating this shift, I think it came from a place of deep fear
Mhm.
for herself. And it it didn't come from a place of hate. And it also didn't make my decision less right for me, but I would say empathy for each other's experience, a true belief in understanding that someone might make the best right choice for them, and it doesn't mean that you're not making the best right choice for you. I 100% think if we were ever given an opportunity to speak in depth again, I would really say, like, I'm so proud of the work that she's built. And I think it was exactly, and she's an incredible mother and an incredible model for her children. And she is somehow managing this incredible work-life blend that is, while different from mine, really right for her. And I would encourage women, especially, we have been taught to believe that if one person makes a choice, it somehow threatens our choice, that it somehow is better than our choice. But in motherhood, we are confronted with that in so many ways, from co-sleeping to cry it out, to, breastfeeding versus bottle feeding, daycare versus nanny versus being at home. I mean, there's a million things that we have to exercise our own intuition, understand our own circumstances, and our relationship to work and family is no different. I would say were some of the relationships that stand out that were so powerful and so incredible in those, especially in those early years when I was really fully at home, were the women who were working out of the home who would share their day to day with me, right? And it felt, I loved feeling like I could be a sounding board for them.
Yeah.
I really did. I think about that a lot. I wrote an op-ed a few years ago, like, dear working mom, ask the stay-at-home mom about their day. Because, in our research, we found 1 in 3 women working out of the home today will pause their careers in the next 2 years. 1 in 2 will downshift to a part-time schedule. And 90% of the women who are at home will return, meaning we're all more alike than we are different. We are ever evolving. And I think keeping the conversation going, I think the women who were working out of the home, who were so open about their day-to-day and their challenges, dignified my brain. I think the women who were sort of in the in-between, who were honest about, like, I think the honesty piece was really cool and really helpful. I try and do it myself, which is, like, they didn't just say, like, oh, things are good, or like, be like, I want to get this yoga training certification, but, like, I don't really understand how that fits in my merchandising background, and they would soundboard together. Because what started as conversations about, what diapers are you using, can evolve not only to deeper conversations about in-laws and husbands, but you can actually be each other's idea generators. There was a woman I interviewed based out of the Bay Area. Her husband relocated to the Napa region, and she was feeling incredibly lost during that time because she was newly at home, having left tech, and she was in a new region. She described 2 things that I think you'll appreciate, 2 sort of friendship wisdoms that she did. One, she was sort of a self-proclaimed introvert, but she found the super connector in the room. Like, she was on the swim meet sidelines and she found the woman who was really plugged in, and she sat next to her all the time. And then that woman invited her to a book club. And at that book club, the second wisdom she shared was, someone asked, how are you? And she said, I'm actually feeling really lost. And the other woman said, me too. And they ended up meeting every Wednesday for a backyard burrito session for 2 years, where they would be each other's accountability partners and sounding boards to really go deep on, like, what do we want to do? And it was this, like, contained period of time where they could express any idea, dig into their old interests, and they took each other seriously. And so maybe that's the last thing I would say is, like, have fun, but take each other seriously, because if we don't take each other seriously, no one will.
Yeah. And seize the opportunity to be fun and to be serious. I mean, part of what I'm hearing in the stories that you've shared that bring this to life in a very real way and frankly fit with a lot of the things that we talk about here is there is an opportunity to deepen the connection, the conversation at every moment. And part of that involves asking better questions. So to your earlier point of not what do you do, but what do you have going on today? How are you spending your time these days? What are you really passionate about or curious about? What's on your mind lately? That can inherently elicit a more interesting response or conversation, perhaps, but certainly a more honest conversation. And even when someone asks us the very, basic question, the social scripted question of how are you, we have the choice to either answer in the very socially scripted way of I'm fine, I'm busy, I'm good, what about you? Or we can answer in whatever way we want. I'm elated, I'm confused, I'm lost, to your point. And so there is always the opportunity to pause and to answer or ask something with a little bit more honesty and specificity. And so I appreciate you sharing that. I think that's such a powerful reminder of the opportunities that are there. I would imagine that your answer to this question will reflect a lot of the ideas and stories that you just shared. But when you think about, again, whether it's your own life or the stories that you have collected over the years, what have you found to be the thing that separates the friendships and connections that, on the one hand, perhaps survive the power pause, or maybe even come out stronger on the other end, so to speak, from the ones that will fade? Because you're right, inherently, not all friendships will last, not all connections need to last. But when thinking about those that we would really like to maintain or hold on to or even strengthen, what do we want to be mindful of there?
Oh, I love that question because it just made me think back on all the people. You saw me like smiling. It, they were all cheerleaders for they all the women who have continued in my life. And I'm very lucky to have a group of 8 of us who are from home and from childhood. And we, all made very different choices over time. I have a few from business school, and I've like several from New York, that the common thread is they were supportive at every choice point. Like they were cheerleader. They were, they celebrated.
Yeah.
They made me feel important, and they were non-judgmental.
Yeah.
I think the judgment is such a divisive, and maybe they did judge it behind the scenes, who knows, but it did not present that way. And I think it comes from a confidence that they each had in their own choice.
Mm-hmm.
But the women with whom I have the strongest relationships with, and they've all done the work. They may feel mixed on any given day, but they have done the work to separate their choices around themselves and their family as being their own.
Yes.
And I think that as you get older just becomes so crucial, because then it's not about like how much help does she have versus me. Like people, they're very understanding of like their family circumstances versus mine versus someone else's. And the ick factor usually comes when I hear judgment. And actually, to your point earlier about like, there's a spectrum of friends. I have a lot of acquaintances. I have a lot of women I see on the regular who I might hold for different reasons. Like they may be people who judge other friends, and that doesn't make me feel so comfortable. I'm like happy to play a game of mahjong with them, but like I am not telling them my deepest secrets.
Yeah.
Right. I think that has become, as I've sort of navigated my 40s, a great learning of there are going to be a lot of people in and out of your life. And some people are in there for a reason. Some people are there for a season. Some people are there for a good time and learn fun hobbies with.
Or a long time. Yeah.
Or a long time. And you invest different amounts. It's like a stock portfolio.
Yeah. I'm thinking back to something that you said just a little bit before, where you were talking about being able to separate what is right for you from what is right for me. And I would imagine that being able to be honest with ourselves about that process is part of it. Knowing this is right for you because you have decided that this is the right decision for you, and trusting in that. And that doesn't mean that we can't have uh, real, honest conversations with our friends where we talk about this and ask questions and try to understand. But if we can approach those questions from a place of, I want to understand you and support you, as opposed to, I want to, I want to judge the validity of this decision, and I want to approach this from a place of, I'm trying to convince you of something. People are very sensitive to the difference between those conversations. So approaching it from a place of curiosity and accepting this is right for you. That doesn't mean that it has to be right for me. And also being honest with ourselves about, this is right for me right now. And I may have a different answer or approach at a later moment or at a later pause. One other question just about those honest conversations. What role have you found privilege to play, not just in the experience of it all? Because as you said earlier, it may be a privilege to choose to stay home and lean into the caregiving role. It may be a privilege to choose to work. But what role does privilege play in those conversations with friends when we are working to better understand our friends' situations, to validate them, to support our friends, and to avoid entering conversations that feel judgmental or make people feel unseen? How explicit do you find the conversation about privilege can get, and how helpful is it to be a little bit more explicit about that in our conversations?
Well, I lean probably to a flaw into being ultra transparent because I think that the only way we put more realistic options on the table for women is if we're honest about what's working for us, right? I think social media, as you know, I think it's a great gift to women in being able, the rise of female entrepreneurs, specifically mothers in entrepreneurship, I think is directly correlated to social media. And there's a PSA, right? As you're scrolling through Instagram, you're putting together corners of people's lives. And you see one person who's killing it at their job, someone who has like a beautiful spotless home, someone else who has like a 5-course cooked meal. And what you don't see is the trade-offs they're making behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Right. So we're coming up with a composite of the ideal mother without the context of everyone's life. And the reality is you can't pick and choose in one part of each other. You have to have the whole life, right? Like if you choose the person who's killing it at their job, you have to bring the childcare with it. You have to bring the nights on the road with it. Like you can't pick and choose. And so the more, at least when we're offline, we can have real versions of motherhood and life in our friendships and understand the trade-offs we are all making or the support systems we all have. The big missing quotient from Instagram is the nannies. Like, no, where is the childcare? Like there, it's not there. The food delivery services are not photographed, and unless it's a sponsored ad, we're not seeing the support systems. So we're measuring ourselves against corners without context. And so I think we owe it to ourselves in our female friendships to be honest about the support systems we have so that people are operating toward realistic benchmarks for their own lives. Now, I would caveat that privilege at least in the United States is incredibly weaponized against women. We are policed for how we use privilege. Our work is undervalued if it's deemed to be done out of privilege, right? So if you have a project done out of love or caregiving even, it's deemed of less value. And when you deem something of less value, you deem it less worthy of respect and support, right? And so I would say with your close people, share with as much transparency as possible.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it comes down to safety and the women that you want to support and help.
I love this. It's making me think, for every, I was going to say filter, but maybe curated photo that we post online of our wins, of our successes, of our, picture perfect lives that people often feel pressured to share or want to share, because of course we want to highlight and share the the uplifting moments and share that with friends and celebrate that with friends. It's almost as if we should have a separate call to action to ourselves to like, okay, now also share something real, whether, it is online or behind the scenes, to somebody who is trusting and somebody who could benefit from that real disclosure of here's the other side that maybe you're not seeing. And I do think we're seeing more of that on social media as well, of people feeling called to give a peek behind the curtain and talk about the nuance that's there. And you do, again, such a beautiful job of this. Speaking of support, you yourself and the work that you're doing and the community that you have built does so much for helping women to feel empowered and to feel seen. And you have a new community and membership that you have created. And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that, because this is in many ways kind of the next chapter of the work that you are doing. And I think that so many people will be interested in it.
Well, I'll back up and say, when I decided I wanted to write a book, it was because there were all these incredible books that were like guides to return to work after baby. And there was no guide to walk through a career break and feel still ambitious and sane and like you were going to return to work with more possibility. And similarly, around the time when I was sort of in my career downshift, so I tried to join a female leadership network, and I was rejected because I didn't have a title. And I thought, when and if this book does well, which I'm grateful that it did, I will start a network for women who don't need to or want to prove their ambition or prove their motherhood. And for women who are incredibly ambitious, but are choosing to shift that ambition and time and energy to other priorities, a place for them to deliver on the promise of the Power Pause, right? That it's a low lift way that you can keep yourself accountable to growing alongside your kids, to investing in those friendships, and really sounding boards, those thought partners. Like it's a community and membership meetup of incredible women from across the country who have had varied careers across merchandising, across law, across research, across medicine, who are making bold choices to shift and using each other as a sounding board to navigate that, but also on their next chapters. And then we do programming biweekly with the experts I'm lucky to have in my network, with people who are killing it at freelance so that they have more examples, or in entrepreneurship, so women are able to sort of access those idea sparks together and have community to shape their next chapters together.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And again, just speaking personally at this point, it's absolutely something that I could have used when I took my varied power pauses in the past, which at the time I struggled to even see it as a power pause. And it's only now in retrospect, thanks to your work, that I can look back on it in a different way, because it definitely felt at the time like this was something that had to happen, both in terms of childcare and also thinking about the year that I took off when my husband was quite ill and I was in the hospital. It was such a lonely time in my life. And also, interestingly, and our conversation today is kind of making me think about this, those were somehow the moments where I was both most present in terms of spending time with my family, with my kids, but also those were pivotal moments in my career. And there were a lot of ideas that were cooking and percolating in those moments. And at the time, there was a little bit of this frustration of, I want to do something with this. And that felt pressure of, I need to do something with this, even if I don't know exactly what that is going to be. And I think in hindsight, that period and that decision to take a pause and take a pause from my PhD program at the time, and take a pause from clinical work, or take a pause from my speaking work, that was a period where so much personal growth happened and set the stage for later professional growth. And I mean, there's a lot of complicated feelings, of course, coming up as I'm talking about it now and even then. And I think just there's so much value in being able to step into those pauses, knowing that it doesn't have to be one way, that it can look different, it can feel different, and that what's happening in that space can carry you forward to your next next pause or next chapter. And I so appreciate you sharing everything that you do and spending this time with me today on office hours. It's such a gift.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your story, Miriam, because I think so much of this narrative is built really on real women's stories. And I think when we share our pauses and shifts in the long game of work and family, it infuses dignity and possibility into something that desperately needed that.
Well, thank you for that. And I'll also just say, I know that you and I have been connected for a while now, and that we've spoken about a little bit more about both of our stories with each other. And I think that those conversations and the honesty that we've been able to share with each other is part of what connected us, and certainly part of why I wanted to have you here today for one of our very first episodes of Office Hours on Two Peas on a Pod. One last question for you. We like to end our Office Hours by asking guests for their next connection step that you would prescribe to people tuning in today. So if there was one action, one step that you would want to encourage listeners to take after listening to our conversation as a way to strengthen their friendships and connections in whatever, value-aligned way you so choose, what would that connection step be?
If you listen to podcasts or read books or read articles, if something lights you up, share it with someone you think that might enjoy it too, because it does two things. One, it reminds that other person in your orbit that you're thinking of them. And two, it gives something that could spark them as well. And that's a gift all around.
I love that. And if people want to learn more about you and your work and your community and the Power Pause, where can they go?
You can follow me on Instagram at Neha Ruch or on LinkedIn. And you can head to thepowerpause.com. We have tremendous free resources. I encourage you to tap into them, whether you are preparing, whether you're blending work and family or planning a return. And of course, the membership information is available there for those who want to dive deeper.
Excellent. Okay. Well, Neha, thank you so much. This was great. And I look forward to continuing the conversation offline. Neha is such an incredible communicator, isn't she? And such a thoughtful collector of people's stories, too. Every time we talk, I find myself looking back on my own life in terms of some of the pauses I've taken with a little bit more compassion, and also looking ahead to future pauses with even more openness and trust. And I hope that you feel some of that, too, after today's conversation. And this is one of the things that I'm just thinking about right now. And one of the things that makes me feel so excited about Two Peas on a Pod and Office Hours, it's that we get to explore friendship through so many different lenses and life experiences. Because friendships touch everything: our work, our identity, our transitions, goals, reinventions, our confidence, and the versions of ourselves that we're leaving behind, and the ones that we've had on pause and are maybe getting reacquainted with. What I also loved about today's conversation is that it was a powerful reminder that taking a pause doesn't mean our friendships have to be put on hold. And there really are two different ways to look at this. On the one hand, our friendships become an essential source of support during those periods of transition or uncertainty. And on the other hand, pauses themselves can reshape our relationships in meaningful ways. Yes, they can deepen friendships or spark new ones. They can also reveal what relationships feel reciprocal and grounding. And sometimes they can even create distance. And so here is your friendly reminder. No matter where you are in your own pause, whether you're in the middle of one, anticipating one, reflecting on one, or supporting someone else through theirs, befriending flexibility is often the very thing that allows us to stay connected to each other and to ourselves. We don't have to be so binary in our thinking and entrenched in our reactions and our old ways, because life is rarely as binary as we make it out to be. A pause isn't always a setback or a break. Sometimes it's a powerful period of recalibration, a stepping stone, a bridge between one version of your life and another. Believe me, there are plenty of moments in my own life where a pause would have been exactly what was needed to make the next right choice. The reasons why we take pauses are also as varied as our needs within them. And what feels right for one person might not feel right for someone else. What feels right for you right now might not have been what felt right 5 years ago, or even 5 years from now.
And the same is true in our friendships. That flexibility and that nuance is essential because some friendships deepen during periods of change and others become more distant or even quietly fade away. And some friendships that were once put on pause somehow find their way back to us again. And this is exactly why openness matters so much. The more open we can be to, yes, our ways of thinking, but also to our conversations and our ways of supporting each other, the less likely we are to be judgmental when life doesn't unfold in neat or linear ways. And speaking of unfolding, that, my friends, was our episode of Office Hours. I am so glad, as always, that we got to share this time together, and I hope that you'll feel inspired to invest in your own friendships and the people who matter most. I will be right back here with you next week for another episode of Two Peas on a Pod. And in the meantime, let's stay connected. We don't have to put our connection on pause. So be sure to follow the show on your favorite podcast platform. Connect with me at the Two Peas on a Pod and at Miriam Kermeyer across social channels. And let's put Neha's connection step into action, shall we? Send this episode to a friend or someone you know who's in the middle of their own power pause. Until our next catch up, take care of yourself and the people in your pod. I'll see you back here next week. Two Peas on a Pod is hosted by Dr. Miriam Kermeyer. Executive produced by Zoe Travis, Matthew Hoffman, Katya Kaminsky, and Dr. Miriam Kermeyer. Produced and edited by Podcast Nation. Producers, Madison Britt and Alicia Paneer. Audio engineer, Miles Carter. Original music by Sarah Walk. Created by Zoe Travis and Matthew Hoffman. Two Peas on a Pod is recorded in Montreal and Los Angeles. Today's program contains information that is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This program is not a substitute for psychological or medical advice. Please seek out your own support and research as needed. Take care, friends.